Hey all, Ron here from Military Images Magazine with a new episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail. On an August morning in 1863, a Union warship appeared off the Atlantic coast of Morocco. The St. Louis, a 20-gun sloop of war, had crossed from the Azores to the port of Safi, a centuries-old city built where the dry hills of western Morocco meet the sea. The bashaw, or governor, met them on the beach. He welcomed the officers ashore and led them to his palace, where tea was served in the Moorish custom. The Americans sat cross legged on rugs, sipped the sweet mint brew, and exchanged compliments to interpreters. Later, when the visit concluded, the bashaw sent down a gift of beef and bread for the crew of about 125. The gesture was appreciated. A good impression, wrote the ship's commander, George Henry Preble, who had orders to show the flag and maintain friendly relations. Among the officers was the man pictured here, Albert Leary Gahan, the ship's surgeon. He was 30 years old, well educated, and by every account, a steady, companionable man. His experience at sea stretched back nearly a decade. During that time, he had seen the coasts of China, the South Pacific, and South America, and as he approached each post with the curiosity of a scientist and traveler, the visit to Morocco may have suited him perfectly. It was likely during this cruise that Gahan sat for this portrait that intrigues anyone who encounters it. In the image, he sits cross legged, dressed in the robe and turban typical of Morocco's Jabala region. His feet are bare in simple sandals. In his hand, he holds a string of prayer beads, his fingers loosely draped around them. His gaze is calm and direct. Beneath the portrait in Arabic script is the name, translated roughly to Gihon, a translation perhaps of Gahan, the name of one of the four rivers that flowed through the biblical Garden of Eden. The origin of the photograph is unknown. The backdrop suggests a studio, not a shipboard improvisation. It may have been made in Tangier or another coastal city where photographers of several nationalities operated during that time. Whether the clothes were borrowed or purchased, whether the pose was his idea or that of a photographer, the record is silent. What remains of the image itself is a U.S. naval officer far from home, momentarily part of a different culture. Morocco had long been a friend to the United States. On December 20th, 1777, Sultan Mohammed III opened his ports to American ships, making his nation the first to recognize the new republic. The act was formalized in 1786 with a treaty of peace and friendship, endorsed today as the longest standing treaty in American diplomacy. The relationship has survived changes of dynasty and government on both sides. By the 1860s, Morocco remained outside the influence of European empires, its independence protected by geography, commerce, and a cautious diplomacy. For the Union, Morocco's continued goodwill during the Civil War carried weight. Gahan's service, and I can share a picture of him in his uniform, his Union uniform, began in 1855 when he was appointed assistant surgeon. He was from Philadelphia, originally trained in both medicine and the liberal arts, and he entered the service at a time when the United States maintained a modest but active fleet overseas. His early tours took him aboard the Levant and the Dolphin on voyages that ranged from the Pacific to South America. When the Civil War began, Gahan was stationed at the Naval Hospital in Brooklyn. In the spring of 1861, he joined the brig Perry with the newly formed Atlantic Blockading Squadron. The Perry helped enforce the blockade along the Florida coast and captured several vessels attempting to slip through. By 1862, his orders had changed again. Secretary of the Navy Gideon Wells directed the St. Louis to patrol the Atlantic Triangle bounded by the Azores, the Canary Islands, and Gibraltar, a vast area through which Confederate commerce raiders were expected to move. The St. Louis departed Philadelphia at the end of January. While Gahan and his crewmates crossed the Atlantic, events in Tangier and Morocco put the US-Moroccan friendship to the test. A French ship carrying two Confederates, Henry Myers and Thomas Tunstall, stopped for coal. The U.S. consul, James DeLong, demanded their arrest, and Moroccan authorities complied. European expats sympathetic to the Confederacy rioted, surrounding the American consulate until soldiers restored order. The prisoners were sent to Boston. You, students of the Civil War, familiar with the Trent affair involving Mason and Slidell in 1861, will see the similarities. Washington approved of the result, but not of the method for the two Southerners in Morocco. DeLong, the consul, was recalled, and the new consul, Jesse McMath, an Ohio attorney, was sent to repair the relations. McMath quickly formed a working friendship with Mohammed Bargash, Morocco's Minister of Foreign Affairs. In the spring of 1863, McMath visited Bargash with a copy of a congressional resolution warning foreign governments not to aid the rebellion. The minister listened carefully and replied that His Majesty's government had, for many years, been the sincere friend of the American nation. That friendship took practical form before too long. When the St. Louis anchored at Safi that August, Gahan and his shipmates entered a setting where diplomacy was conducted through custom and conversation. The mint tea served in small glasses, a formal procession through the palace, the exchange of gifts, all carried meaning. Preble, the commander, noted that European consuls in the port also expressed satisfaction with the Americans' visit and that news of their conduct would reach the Sultan, Mohammed IV. The Sultan was all of 29 years old and had inherited a complex kingdom. His rule was framed by European ambitions on one side and the older Islamic order on the other. In this context, a friendly meeting with the American crew was maybe a bit more than ceremonial. Several weeks later, Morocco, through the Sultan, issued a formal decree. Confederate ships and agents were not to be received in Moroccan ports. The reason given was direct. They are not known to us, nor is there any consul which can make them known to us. Preble forwarded the order to Washington, noting that the St. Louis's visited probably had helped to bring about this decision. Gahan's name doesn't appear on any official correspondence about the incidents, but his presence can be traced to the ship's medical reports and later recollections. As surgeon, his duties extended beyond treating wounds and illnesses. He was responsible for the health and sanitation of all those sailors, a task that demanded both scientific rigor and patience. It's not difficult to imagine him walking the beach at Safi, studying the light on the whitewashed walls of the ancient city, watching the markets from a shaded alley. He was a man of observation. Years later, he would write detailed travel pieces for Harper's New Monthly magazine, describing Lisbon and the Atlantic Islands and Morocco with the eye of a naturalist and the precision of a naval officer and surgeon. That Moroccan photograph, it fits easily into the pattern of his curiosity. In some ways, you might argue, it seems less of a statement of a souvenir of a kind, but really a mark of his experience, a record of place and of time. The St. Louis continued her patrols through 1864, maintaining watch over the shipping lanes between North Africa and the Canary Islands. Preble had a second encounter with the Confederate cruiser Florida in Madeira, but chose not to fire, fearing a breach of Portuguese neutrality. For his caution, he was reprimanded, though later reinstated and eventually promoted to rear admiral. The ship's mission, though mostly uneventful, accomplished what it set out to do: to deter Confederate commerce raiders and reinforce the Union's presence on the Atlantic Rim. After the war, Gahan's career advanced steadily. He served at naval hospitals in the United States and abroad, including Japan, where he aided sailors injured in a Nagasaki typhoon and received decorations from foreign governments. His professional writings focused on naval hygiene, public health, and education, subjects that reflected his lifelong concern with order and well being. He retired in 1895 with the rank of Commodore and Senior Medical Director of the Navy. 6 years later, in November 1901, he suffered a stroke in New York City and died soon after. He was buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery in Philadelphia. The grave is unmarked. The photograph of Albert Gahan and Jabal address represents a fleeting moment within a larger story: the voyage of an American ship to a friendly coast during a time of war, a country reaffirming ties that stretched back to the Revolution, a physician curious enough to learn from what he saw. Thanks for listening to the story of Surg and Gahan. We'll see you on the next episode of Life on the Civil War Research Trail.